Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about graphing. It's a really short and sweet PowerPoint. Hopefully you've been graphing in a lot of your classes since you were a young age. You've been probably graphing or seeing graphs in English classes. You've probably seen them in history classes, talking about percent populations and draft numbers, things like that. You've definitely seen them in all of your science classes, and you've also seen them in your math classes. You've drawn parabolas, you've drawn line graphs in things like Algebra 1 and Algebra 2 and geometry. So this should all be review for you today. Hopefully it is. Hopefully this is easy for you and it's an easy day. So in science, we draw graphs to display data or information visually. A lot of times you can get overwhelmed if I just keep rattling numbers off to you. On day 1, the plant grew 5 centimeters. On day 2, it grew 5.2 centimeters. On day 3, it grew 5.8 centimeters. On day 4, it grew 4 centimeters. On day 5, it grew. I could go on for hundreds of days for an experiment. And when I got to 100, you'd have no clue what I said for 1. So you need something to visually see how all of that data relates and if there's an overall trend in that data. So that's when we're going to bring a graph out. There's lots of different graphs. There's plot and whisker graphs, there's pie graphs, there's bar graphs, there's line graphs, there's sine curves, there's all kinds of graphs. We're going to focus on the main 3 today. So the first one we're going to focus on is a line graph. And a line graph is going to show us how the data changes over time. So like I said, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, even year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. So over time, what happened to what we were looking at? Usually also in a line graph, you're going to have on your vertical label something that you measured. Number of inches of plant growth, inches of snow, inches of rain, all of that's given on line graphs in Farmer's Almanacs. So there's a few things you need when you draw every graph, and we're going to go over them with the line graph and then talk about them again on graphs on the next pages. The first thing you need when you draw a graph is a title. We need to know what you're graphing on that title. You also need to put a title on your X and your Y axis. If you didn't have time in minutes here, I wouldn't know what these numbers stood for. It could have been days, it could have been hours, it could have been years. So you need to have a title there to let us know what you're measuring. You're always going to graph your dependent variable on the y-axis. I remember the y-axis is the one that goes up and down because at the bottom of the letter y, the letter itself goes up and down. The x-axis is the one that travels left to right, and that's where your independent variable goes. Remember, your independent variable is the one that you're manipulating. Your dependent variable is the one you're measuring. I already said both of these axes need a title. Last but not least, we need to know the units that are labeled. So we have that over here, degrees Celsius and minutes, and these units need to be evenly spaced. So you can see on this temperature, we go from 30, 20, 10. They're all separated by a series of 10. You couldn't put negative 30 here and then 0 here and then 10. When we graphed our data, it would skew our results and we wouldn't get a correct picture of the overall trend of the data. So we have to separate them evenly by even units. So that's what numbered evenly means down here. And that needs to be on the x-axis and the y-axis. The next graph we're going to look at is a bar graph, and that's useful for comparing information by counting. 20 people brought their lunch from home today. 30 people are eating school lunch. We would put that information in a bar graph. We need all of the same parts in a bar graph that we would need in a line graph. So we need a title. We need to know what we're measuring or what all of these bars represent. For this one, it represents height in centimeters. I'm assuming this over here is the number of people, so that's a flaw in this graph. This isn't labeled. This axis needs to be labeled. I'm going to assume, though, this is number of students. And then each bar is individually labeled. One student was 156 centimeters. It looks like 3 students were 158 centimeters. So this is a graph. So we can see the overall heights of students in the class just by glancing down. I could tell you that most students in the class were 168 centimeters. That would be the average height of most of the students. So bar graphs are able to give us overall pictures very, very quickly. The last graph we're going to look at today, sorry, I'm getting poked by a pencil. The last graph we're going to look at today is a pie chart. We can also call them circle graphs. And it's to show how a quantity is broken down into parts. Usually we'll see these in ethnicities, how many people participated. You could divide it up by grade. 10th grade would be one color, 11th and 12th grade. 11th grade would be one color, 12th grade would be another. It could be class participation in pep rally. You could graph anything like that where you're looking at individual parts of a whole. They do this when they talk about dog breeds in the country. They look at how many dog breeds there are total. Then they look at the number of dogs there are that are registered from each breed. And it gives us an idea of which is the most popular. So here is a circle graph that's properly labeled and set up. It's got a title. It's divided into equal parts. And if I add all of these parts together, I'm going to get 100%. That's important. It has to add to that every time. And then each one is labeled. So this is elements making up living things. So a living thing is 65% oxygen. We're 18% carbon. The smallest part of this, by looking at this graph, is sulfur at 0.3%. So again, I can get a lot of information very quickly looking at these graphs. If you have any questions about the graphs or what makes them up, please let me know. And that is all I have for you today.